Hi everybody, welcome to another video about game version differences. Now here I have two copies of the game Elvira the Fantasy Adventure by Accolade, which came out around 1990. And you'll see these boxes look pretty much the same, except for the fact that this one here on the left is pretty worn in some areas around the edges. But there are some differences. And again, if you care about differences when you're buying games, then you want to be able to pick up on these things. So the most obvious difference that you'll see right away is that both of these games have a sticker on the front of the box. This one here on the left says, "Caution, contains blood-curdling graphics," whereas this one here on the right says, "Role-playing Game of the Year, Computer Gaming World." Now, typically, an original release of a game will not have a sticker on it that says it's the game of the year. It does happen nowadays because they send out preview copies and there's a lot of hype, but back in the day it was more unusual, especially if you see two different versions, one with a sticker that says game of the year and one without. Typically the sticker with the game of the year, that box is the re-release box, and basically after it was already released they saw it sold a bunch of copies and they got a good review from a magazine, and they decided to put a sticker on it to note that. So that's a hint that this is an earlier release and this is a later release. A second thing you can see is by looking at the side of the box here, you can see that this version of the game comes on both 5 1/4 and 3 1/2 inch discs for IBM, whereas this version over here on the right comes on just 3 1/2 inch discs. Now, it's common for there to be two releases of a game that come out around the same time, where one of them is 5 1/4 inch discs and one of them is 3 1/2 inch discs, because some people had one size drive, some people had a different size drive, and the companies wanted to be able to cater to both. The nicer companies, like Sierra, for example, would typically put both size discs. And here, an example on the left, you see both size discs. Now, if you see two copies of a game where one of them has both size discs, and one of them has only the 3 1/2 inch disc, which was the later released format, you have to assume that the one with both size discs is the earlier release, and then at some point the company decided when they re-released the game, you know what, nobody really has the 5 1/4 inch drives anymore, there's no point wasting our money putting in the 5 1/4 inch discs, we'll just put in the 3 1/2 inch discs and save some money. So again, that's another hint that this is an earlier release, and this is a later release. So now let's open both of them up and see what the contents are. And we'll see the contents are roughly the same for both, but not quite exactly the same. So first of all, the first obvious difference, which I've already noted, is that this copy here on the left has 5 1/4 inch discs, where the one on the right does not. Now they both have 3 1/2 inch discs. It happens to be that these are on blue disc stock, and the ones on the right in this box are on black disc stock. That doesn't necessarily mean anything because sometimes they just use whatever discs they had lying around. But it turns out I did actually load up all these discs, and they all work fine, and they're slightly different. The way that this game works is there's no install program that you run to install the games off the floppies. They tell you just to copy all the files onto the hard drive and then run the install program, which uncompresses the files and does some of the setup. And it turns out I noticed that the files are in a different order on the different disks, like the install.exe, and this one was on disk 4, I believe, and this one was on disk 1. And then I also noted that when they ask you to set up your video type, on this version it just gave you an option of VGA and EGA, whereas in this one there was VGA, EGA, or Tandy. So there are definitely two different releases of the software, point release in terms of version. And again, I'm not sure which discs are later, but presumably these ones are later because they came in the later box. Now, one thing I noticed that's different also is that this earlier version here has a card that comes with it that says ingredients, which lists basically everything that's supposed to come with the game. And this one didn't have that. It could be just this one's missing it, but I also noted that this one specifically lists the 5 1/4 inch discs and the 3 1/2 inch discs. And it's possible that once they threw out the 5 1/4 inch discs, they said, you know what, there's no point in making this anymore. we don't need this card, we just have to revise it anyways, just forget it and just get rid of it. And they didn't include it. Now, if anybody has any more information on that, I definitely would like to hear it. But this copy definitely did not have it. This one also had a proof of purchase card, which is also mentioned, by the way, in the ingredients, one proof of purchase card. I'm not sure what the point of this was, frankly, and this version did not have it, and maybe they just figured at some point that it wasn't needed and they stopped including it. Both copies here have a hint book ad, and these are basically completely identical, no real difference. One of them is a little more worn than the other. They both have a card for troubleshooting tips, and again, these seem to be pretty much the same. Now, if you look at the two different cards, you'll see that on the bottom of this one here, the original one, it says ACO 3617, and this one says ACO 3617B. So it's some kind of later revision. Here it also says 1090, and here it says 1190. So again, October 1990, November 1990. It shows it's slightly later release. However, I didn't find any difference between the two cards, except for the fact that this one on the right has an additional picture of bats on it, on the back of it. And maybe they decided at some point they have to add a picture of a bat on the back of this setup card. I have no idea why that would be needed, but I guess at some point they decided to make that change. This is the installation guide, which again is pretty much the same on both. In fact, it looks like it's exactly the same. Even everything on the back is the same as well, so this is identical. There's a registration card, which is identical between both. Both of them have a disc exchange card, and obviously those are a little bit different. This one here on the earlier release, the white one, says this package should contain 3 5¼ inch high density discs and 5 3.5 inch double density discs. Actually, only contained 4, which seem to be all of them, which is interesting. So maybe this is a mistake. But it says if you may have only drives that take 5 1/4 inch double density discs, so don't despair. We'll gladly exchange those. Now in this one, they only gave you the 3.5 inch discs on this yellow card here on the right, and this, as a result of that, they had to give you basically a lot more choices for disc exchange formats. This older one came with a Prodigy special offer. This one on the right, the newer one, did not. It's possible that someone lost it and it doesn't have it, or it's possible that by the time this one was released, nobody cared about Prodigy and therefore they didn't include it. I'm not sure. They both have this Imelda's receipts and spells. This is basically the copy protection. And again, these seem to be pretty much identical, except if you look at the back, this one here says ACO 4142. This one says ACO 4142B. This is September 1990. This is November 1990. So they are slightly different releases, although I wasn't able to determine what's the difference. I mean, if you look at this, it's all stuff which you need a red filter to read, and it's not something I was going to go compare in detail. But apparently there is some difference there, not sure what. Then there's the horror guide, which is basically the instruction booklet. This one seems to be, again, we see the one on the left here says ACO 4143. The one on the right says ACO 4143B. In this case, they both say October 1990, but apparently this one is some kind of later revision. What the actual change is, I don't know. It was nothing obvious that I saw. And then finally, there's a catalog for each one, and this one is a Accolade 1990-1991 catalog. This one is an Accolade 1993 catalog. So we see now this release probably was actually a few years later that they put this actual version out here. I'll go through the catalogs briefly because I know those are a little bit interesting just to see what's in here. In 1990-1991, we have Elvira, we have Star Control, we have Ishido The Way of Stones, Test Drive 3, Jack Nicklaus Golf, a bunch of other Accolade games that nobody really cares about generally. Sorry if you're an Accolade lover. That's the 1991 one. The 1993 one We have a few more things, smaller basically. Hardball 3, with Al Michaels featured. Another Jack Nicklaus game. Mike Ditka Football. Test Drive 3. Star Control 2 this time. Elvira 2. Waxworks. And then all the older games get like a very small picture here. Interestingly enough, they're also marketing Legend titles and Tsunami titles. I guess they had some kind of licensing agreement with them. Anyway, those are the differences in those releases. And again, for some people, you may not care at all. For others, if you're trying to collect a specific version or multiple versions, or if you just want to know what you're getting when you buy something, sometimes small things can add up to differences in value or just in what you're looking for. It's good to know what's going on out there and what the different versions are. Hope this was interesting. Hope everyone enjoyed, and have a good day.